And it's a little after 1 o'clock on, what's today? Tuesday, December 5. Welcome to everybody. This is the Financial Committee meeting, and the roll call is Barbara Curtis, Kimberly Berlaire, Belair.
Like the freshman song.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Carolyn Jones, Michael Hogan, Calvin Jaber, and myself. We do have a quorum, and Austin will be joining us. And we've got two items. One is the debt service coverage ratio, which we will start with, and then an extensive proposed revisions to the developer agreement. So, Kim, if you could just give an overview of, again, of.
So last meeting, I came to you guys about the debt service coverage ratio of putting a policy in place and going over our numbers, what we look like now. Even the state now is requiring a debt service coverage ratio of 1.2 as the floor. When we do our rate setting, we look to have a floor of 1.25. So I feel like we should have that, memorialize that in a policy of that is what our floor is of 1.25. And it throughout here, it went to the legal side of it and everything is written up. So it's going to be worked through in our budget to show that we are gonna stay at least 1.25. Anytime that we are going for new funding, it will be taken to administration first to make sure that we're still at the 1.25 before it goes to the board for any vote. And if it is under 1.25, the levers are listed there of what we need to change to be in compliance of the policy before we can do funding.
Regardless of what the number is there possibility of going below the number prior to consideration of a new funding issue?
If we have unexpected
I mean, would
revenue loss,
that pop up
something like
automatically, or we have a tracking that?
Anytime that there's a budget adjustment, there will be an update on the debt service coverage.
Does that
ratio.
need to be included in
It can
here?
absolutely be included. Yep.
Since it's a policy.
Well, here's the time to do it.
I'm sorry?
So now's the time to do it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what's that clarification again that you want?
That we don't limit it by what the words say, of just making sure that we hit that number or above in a funding decision making. It could be during a year there's something happens or is happening that debt ratio number has fallen below what the target is, and we should include what happens at that point.
At any given time.
Yeah.
That's what you say.
And the biggest drivers of that would be a change in our net income. And if for some reason, like we refinance or something
Mhm.
for the debt payments,
Yeah,
About an emergency expenditures,
that would fall under there too.
You'd have to get board approval if it fell under that ratio. Is that the idea? Whatever the target ratio is.
I hope so.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, I'm not sure that
Ratification.
I'm not sure if it makes sense to get board approval rather than
Yeah.
put a plan in place to rectify it.
Right.
I
I mean,
don't think, we already have a policy that says can't fall below 1.25. And I will take out Strive because we're already at 2 point something, so we're already at above, we're at above 1.25. So I don't I don't know what strive to maintain means. Either you're at it or above it, or you're below it, and if you're below it, you gotta take some action.
Immediately.
And what that action is. So strive seems to be a wiggle word there that, just doesn't, it's not precise to me.
The Lewes BPW will maintain instead of
I mean,
strive to.
Exactly, and because you're already there anyway, and if you
Mhm.
don't maintain it, then what actions do you have to take? And also too, I think it says to calculate the ratio on an annual basis, or at least when funding is initiated or contemplated. I like it to be more frequently than annual. Possibly, at least on a quarterly basis anyway, at a minimum on a quarterly basis.
Yeah.
Now, I recognize that things don't change, very much during the course of the year. The ratio is not going to change all that much either. But I think it's a matter of putting it visibly in front of the board. It's an action item, it's a conversation, it's a discussion. And I think something of this magnitude, I think I'd rather have, my recommendation is to have it out there, at least on a quarterly basis, so that people are aware of it. And not on an annual basis where, to me, it's lost.
Well, there might be two.
Is there a downside from putting it on a quarterly basis of how hard it is to reconstruct the numbers, or?
No,
It's
It's pulling right from the
okay.
budget. In which there is, when we do budget adjustments, it does happen quarterly. So
Okay.
it probably would be appropriate as we represent the
Okay.
budget adjustments with the debt service coverage ratio.
Mike had raised a question or had shared some information that he had on corporations. Debt ratio numbers. Can you?
But before I
Okay.
did want to finish up this one question on this. So there's sort of two elements. One of these is a realization. In other words, did you fall below 1.25? And the other aspect of this is more in budgeting. Are you doing anything in your budget that would potentially pull you under 1.25? And so Barbara raised an issue. What if you had an emergency? So we may be in a position, for example, where we need to raise capital, so maybe you use a line of credit. And a line of credit is going to have to be serviced, but in an emergency, that could affect your ratio. So that was kind of where I was saying, if we know we're in a situation, maybe to Barbara's point about an emergency where you might do something that would drive you below this, is there a mechanism to at least let the board understand, because it is a credit rating impact on the organization? I would say, I don't know if we need to make a distinction between the budgeting process and doing something in the budget that would pull us below that versus the realization as we're going through a year, if something pulled us under. So there's a little bit different, two different concepts there. But on to the 1.25.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Before you move on.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that you have a breach of policy, it's immediate notification to the board.
And then
And so at any point in time, while I recommend that we have a calculated on a quarterly basis for presentation purposes. If it's
Right.
ever breached, it's immediate notification.
I'm sorry, Kevin, I must have misunderstood. I thought you said earlier that wasn't a board issue. And that's why I was raising that, because I thought it was.
Oh, yeah, it is a board issue.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. So I misunderstood what you
Yeah,
said.
it's a board policy. So anytime you have a breach of board policy, it should be immediate notification.
So with the quarterly, I can do the budget adjustments, the new debt service coverage ratio using that budget and the actual of at the end of that quarter.
If you're doing a quarterly basis, then you're taking into consideration not only the annual budget, but also to the actuals versus budget over the course of the year, right?
Correct.
Okay, and then if it's, you ever fall below it for any reason, if it's an emergency funding reason, your example, have to use a line of credit. If it falls below 1.25, it's immediate notification at that point.
And you will immediately recognize that if there's an emergency and be alerted to, okay, what are the tools that we have?
Yes.
And whether there's an impact on the.
So I don't know if maybe number 2 should be reworded of,
But also too, it's not only notification, but it's a plan to get it back to 1.25. I mean, it's more than just a notification. What
Right.
steps are necessary? And maybe that's a discussion at the board level or with recommendation by management. Austin and company to say, okay, we're below 1.25, but here's the plan to get us back to 1.25 in a certain period of time. It can't be 5 years, right?
So that's what,
There's got to be some period that makes sense.
that's what number 2 was hinting at of the levers that we can pull. That we need to increase our net income or reduce our yearly debt payments
Or both, it's.
or both.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a ratio here, so you're just playing with the numbers. You get it down 1.25.
Right.
Yeah, there may be a legal element to this too. If we end up doing a municipal debt offering, there may be some catches in the loan doc or in the document that might pull us to a particular number as well, but that's not what's being addressed here.
Right,
So that'd be a subsequent event, right?
but in negotiating that new loan or special bond, we will be aware of the possible ripple effect
Mhm.
and catch it there.
And also for all the federal funding, they do look at your policies to make sure that you have a more strict financial policies. And right now, we need to put more in place.
Mhm.
On to the 1.25, if we're done talking about some of the contingencies. I don't have a strong view on where utilities or governmental entities would be, but I did look at the corporate sector by credit rating. And 1.25 would put you down into just about junk bond territory. That would be very low. A AAA corporate bond would be up about a 7 or 8 in this ratio, not a 1.25. The lower the work, the more difficult your financial decision is.
Mhm.
1.25 may be perfectly acceptable for a governmental organization. I just don't know. I'm just kind of conveying what I
That's
see in the
For not for profit, I don't know where exactly I can.
Nevertheless, if it's stressful for a corporation to be in that level, it could be very stressful also for a governmental organization to be that low as well. So I think if we don't have a rampant reason to have this dictate in the policy in the next couple of weeks, it might be worth thinking a little bit more about that 1.25.
I think the start, just kind of rehashing, the starting point was the state requires now 1.2.
Okay.
And just to be safe for the moment, and it's a slight incremental target increase as a placeholder, we'll say. Unless, would it be easier to go to 1.3 right now? I mean, is there-
Right now, we're well over this 1.25.
Right.
It's,
I think 1.3 is just arbitrary at this point.
yeah,
It's just 1.25, 1.3.
Same difference.
Well, what are we at this point then? Just, I forget.
I thought
it was
2.1.
at 2, it was over
2.1.
2, yeah.
I thought what you gave us before was 2.1, the information that you provided earlier. Might have it.
So that's, if we're going out for a loan,
Mhm.
we have a policy that says the 1.25. And we have documentation that it's actually 2 or whatever it is. That
Which-
can be put, that if it makes a difference in the rate.
Before anybody gives us money, they ask for all of our financials and they run their own numbers off
Okay,
of our financials.
so that's a backstop, if you will.
I think it's a good thing, actually, presentation wise, your policy says 1.25, the actual is 2.1. I mean, you're far exceeding the optics, right? You're far exceeding your floor, I mean, if you want to put up about 2 and your policy at 2 and your actual is 2.1. Why? I mean, what's a concern at that level from a cash flow perspective? Pretty close to getting to, warning zone, might definitely.
Has Fulton Bank or anybody else we banked with ever given us a ratio that they would be comfortable with?
No, but I can ask.
You can ask Stifle too.
By full, they would,
On the
me?
bonding side,
Yeah.
they may.
I think which will probably come back and say, if you have a ratio of X, you'll be kind of rated this way.
Mhm.
And if you got a ratio of Y, you'll be rated this way. And the worse your rating, the higher your interest rate is going to be.
Mhm.
It's not going to be, do you get a loan or not do you get a loan? It's going to be, do you pay 3% or 5%?
Amen.
My guess is this 1.25 may come back to be very aggressive, meaning we might be paying a reasonably high interest rate if we're down into this kind of financial stress area.
I mean, it's even more the reason to find out what the bank's comfortable with.
Yeah.
I mean, you can pull from Smyrna because Smyrna just closed on their $20 million bond. So if you find out what their debt coverage ratio was for when they closed, then that would tell
And
you.
if they have a requirement, let's say in the loan doc or in the offering docs.
I can make some inquiries. Our company I work for actually underwrites bonds, municipal bonds. I mean, usually they're not the small ones, though. You're talking about New York City and.
Yeah.
We
Well,
just had people in the other day, they specialize in this area. They came in to talk about municipal bond offerings, so I think he would be a real good person to touch base with.
Sussex County closed on $100 million bond for sub 2%. I think it was like 1.9. So maybe a good one too. I don't know who did it. I don't know if they did. They
The
probably
rate
just-
was 1.9.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice.
Wow.
Yeah, $100 million.
for all
Yeah, really.
20 years.
I think 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's cheaper than SR money.
I'm telling you.
Okay, so my homework is checking rates to follow up with Fulton and Stifle and see if I can pull anything up for not for profit of what the standard is.
Mhm.
And then I had the city of Smyrna and Sussex County who just got bonds to see what their experience was.
Yeah, I'll inquire from our underwriters. Again, we underwrite bonds nationally, so.
And to put 1.25 in as a minimum doesn't mean that's your target.
Right.
Uh,
But the problem is if my sense is if you get down to 1.25, we're probably under some level of financial stress and that your avenues or options to manage that might get more and more difficult as you get, closer and closer to a low limit.
It's a minimal, it's a disadvantage.
So as part of that, besides having a floor, should we have a goal as part of the policy?
Kind of where you're generally operating at. I don't know, I guess if you do that and then you're getting close to the
Yeah.
minimum, does that look like you're under some,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of gamesmanship here, but if somebody looked at that and said, hey, look, you guys are gonna be in junk bond territory if you get there. Is that a real good, minimum for you?
No,
Mhm.
that, a better response to that the question is good, is proper. The input, the feedback that we get,
Mhm.
would maybe give us some hints as to if that's a
Yes.
good idea or, how that plays out.
Well, maybe to Austin's point, if we're reaching out to a couple of people, that's a good question to ask.
Mhm.
And also, should there be in the policy, if we do have a goal level, criteria for when it's wise to go below that goal level, but stay above the ratio? I mean, the floor.
The problem is the ratio has two components. On the top of the ratio, the numerator, it's an income number,
Yeah.
which these guys have some control over, but it does have variability. And the bottom of it is your interest rate or basically your loan coverage ratio. So that's something that that's probably relatively fixed. My sense is if you're bouncing around that 1.25, it's probably because your income is volatile
Yes,
Yeah.
not good.
and not good. And then the question is how much
Mhm.
control in a very short time do you have on that?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know how volatile our operating income is here.
I would say not. That if anything,
Maybe during
it's
the
usually for the
pandemic.
better. That for like developer payments and things like that.
It'd be,
But-
you'd be more, if you were to get hit by a storm, then you would become volatile.
You can
Yeah.
about to- Or
No,
how
it
you
have
do in
to
the
be,
Yeah, then
pandemic
you would
was
have
that,
retreat if you have
Mm.
damage,
Mhm.
because then you're not
Mhm.
bringing revenue in. Which you can take an insurance policy out to cover that too.
right?
We've had that conversation.
Mhm.
Did the pandemic impact in a negative way the operating income?
Mhm.
There was enough people who stayed here.
Yeah, they stayed here.
Okay,
There's really not that variability, there's not many components on the income stream, right? These only have 4 components, right? I
Correct.
mean, it's not like a, ongoing concern where you have potentially multiple sources of income you have to be concerned about. And so I would think it, and I would think 1.25, having something other than 1.25 as a goal. Well, I'm just reluctant to put out another ratio out there. When we were saying we have to have it maintained at 1.25.
But that's
And,
minimal.
and if we're at 2, that's great. If we're at 7, that's great. We're above the floor. To say now
But
that,
the floor doesn't give you a whole lot.
what do you mean, does it give?
Well, the 1.25 is, it's still an insecure in terms of what kind of borrowing. you can do.
We don't know that at this point. I think we have to go out and figure out, what does that mean for underwriters?
Okay.
Who, is 1.25 cause a concern?
Mhm.
We know the
As a
state's out there at
policy.
1.2, so the state apparently, that's their floor of,
Mhm.
so I think we need to have more information about
Yeah.
what underwriters, if we're concerned about underwriters at this point, like, and borrowing, what is their
What's the
concern?
bank comfortable?
Hey, Kim,
Period.
what would the state do? Let's just say we fell to 1. Is there, if the state is requiring a 1.2, is there a series of things that would happen from the state's perspective?
I don't know if that would hit. Never dealt with it. They may look at it as to try and provide subsidy to bring you closer. By giving principal forgiveness to bring the debt down, depending if it's a $20 million obligation. If they say if we can provide $10 million in principal forgiveness, so you only have to borrow 10, that brings your number up to
Mhm.
whatever it may be.
That's different than I thought. I thought you were going to say they would either call in the loan. Or they would, or not be willing to give you a new one until you got your.
It may
Got
be
it up.
closing documents. I have to go back and look at the closing documents.
I guess, is there an important party to this? It would be good to know. What that's in motion.
Really?
Yeah, but we also have to consider, I don't know what it means when you're a municipality and providing these kinds of services as opposed to, the private enterprise, who
Don't know.
I don't think the state has any interest in seeing BPW stressed or go under or caused anything that would cause BPW, because you're talking about city, right? And they do everything they can to help the city, the public utility. So I think I get what you're saying. Companies fail all the time, every day, because of financial stress. I don't think that's going to happen here, and I think there's a lot of safeguards out there anyway.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at one level, Calvin, that this organization, I'm sure from the state's level, they don't want this to fail. But institutions do go into receivership and things like that, conservatorship, and if the state says, hey, look, we put money out to you, you guys made promises, now you've dropped below this minimal target here, we're sending down our auditors and our,
Sure.
so the question is, if we drop below 1.25, is it a good thing and they cut back on the principal payments, or is it a bad thing because we go into some kind of conservatorship or, or some other financial overview? And I just don't know the answers to these. I know I'm more comfortable with what happens in the corporate level when that happens, not in the.
Well, let's get some information and just, we can come back and discuss it further, but I think, again, I think 1.25 for our purposes, I would stay with that. I also like to say, I think BPW is a well-managed, well-run company. I don't foresee any problems in the foreseeable future. Of any financial stress, and you have a lot of levers to pull, to keep it that way. So,
Well, there's always an emergency lurking out there somewhere.
Yes. And plus
Yeah,
investment
there is.
losses, those are another big vulnerability.
but as a municipality, I would thought
Well,
that the state
Investment
be there
losses.
too.
That's one. They don't have a lot of investment pull right now.
Yeah.
But I am worried about things like hurricanes or major,
Yeah.
disasters that cause a huge.
Mhm.
And then you've got to run to the bank, you got to get a big line of credit or something, and all of a sudden your debt ratios are going a little crazy. On the top of that, the top of that, the numerator in that calculation, in that kind of scenario is going to drop.
Mhm.
Because now you're not delivering services and whatnot, so you've got your costs going, the bottom's going up and the
But those are catastrophic events. I mean, we're probably not the only one that's gonna be feeling something like that.
Right.
And that can be spoken about in the policy too.
Okay, we'll get feedback and
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah, and there's a lot we talked about there, to clean this up too. Did you get all the notes there?
Yeah. Don't you see them?
So on to the developers obligation. Certainly. If I thought it might be helpful if Austin would just walk us through how does a developer agreement get done? So we make sure we're covering the bases of the cast of characters involved.
Two situations. You have one situation which is an in-city parcel, and then you have another situation which is an out-of-city parcel. Relatively the same, other than they have to go through two different approval processes. One is through the city approval process, one is through the county approval process. So we can use Tower Hill as an example, went through a county approval process. After the plans were approved, the development agreement was executed. The development agreement lays out the terms of what's going to take place. If there's offsite utilities, you incorporate that in. Another kind of the caveat would be like the Lodge Historic Lewes and Dutchman's Harvest. That was a two-part developers agreement. It was two different parcels, but it was incorporated into one. We actually performed all-site utility improvements that had to do with their project. So there was a reimbursement amount in there that I think was like 26% of the total cost. So we billed that after the project was done. So that's where it kind of gets a little unique, because we've seen it done where you actually have a line-by-line cost share document, which historically doesn't work out because it never comes in to be the right number. Doing a percentage of the total cost works out great, because whatever the total cost is, the developer would be responsible for like 26%. What we've noticed, and the reason that this is up for discussion, is we've separated kind of like a pre-approval phase and a post-approval phase. So if you're inside the city, the pre-approval phase is all costs associated with a development review up until final approval is to be billed through the city of Lewes. And that would be like through the planning commission process, etc. That would be any review fees, anything associated with that project. After that, that's when the development agreement would be signed and executed by both parties if it's an in-city parcel. So it would be a document that incorporates both the city and the BPW along with the developer. So then the board takes on the responsibility of billing out all of those costs associated with construction administration. GMB usually does the inspection, but the board receives the bill and then the board bills for those services. What we've come across most recently, and this is the reason that it's on here, is that we billed for projects that even go back into the 2018s, where we don't necessarily get the bill that we send with a net 30, we don't get reimbursement for. We have a project out right now that's 50,000. We had projects that were 250,000 without reimbursement. Now, we've gotten the money over time, but we've never been in a position to charge an interest rate or have any sort of documentation that allowed us to do something to penalize them. If that, I don't,
Right.
like a normal, like if you don't pay your credit card on time, you get hit with a fee.
Right. And you don't have that?
We don't have that today. It's not in the development agreement at all. We've never dealt really with it, I would say, within the past like 5 years.
But with delinquent bills and stuff, look at the revenue you're using.
Yeah,
Jesus.
and the amount of
Good Lord.
energy that from a staff level we put into some of it.
Here.
Yeah. So that's what I think what Richard was working through with Kim and with Mike Hoffman to put this in front of you. This is the trigger to, should we go down this path and we run into a situation where you have a delinquent developer that doesn't pay their bills, this has a mechanism to charge them interest until obviously the project moves forward. I will add that the caveat to this entire discussion is that if a developer is delinquent, they won't go through the approval process because we won't approve the development
Right,
unless that is taken care of, which that would be.
so you're gonna do it
any
up
sort of-
front, get it up front, yeah.
If delinquent on these charges, is there something else going on with the developer? Is there like other kinds of problems?
Without diving too deep into like each individual development and knowing what their financial viability is. You can only assume that, for example, it may be a lot of charges all at once, because GMB in most circumstances, they're performing a service for both the board and the city. So if they're doing it all together, which means they're doing utilities, the paving, the curb and gutter, the stormwater, the electric, the water, the sewer. Those bills can be, Kim, we've seen them $15,000 to $20,000 a month. For 6 months, 7 months, depending on the construction schedule. So, I mean, you can see projects go 150, 200, $250,000 in a relatively short amount of time.
So the developers are saying it's cash flow issues.
Either that or they're just trying to take advantage. of
That's-
Or they know.
what's the information. They don't have any penalty.
Yeah.
And you, right,
You want to hold
I mean,
your
what's
cash
to
as long as
stop
you can. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think your
Yeah.
sense is probably there's some taking advantage of the
Yes,
Board of Public Works.
we have, and it's not calling, but we have developers that are very good, we have developers that are very timely. And we have developers that are the opposite. And we don't know what their circumstances are. We just know that every single month, Kim writes them a bill and CCs me and says,
so but you know who your bad apples are.
correct.
But you also probably have new apples coming up from time to time you have no history with.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that's kind of almost easy, but the fact that they established a record of being negative and all the time, I mean, Jesus.
Which we're
Dollars
very,
is insane.
I will tell you that, each, and I say this, each administration does it differently, like Darren did things differently than what I do. We are about as open as you can get when it comes to how we bill for the developers' fees. Like, I'm having a meeting tomorrow with a developer that wants to talk about how their stuff's being charged. We had a meeting earlier today about, or with a developer or about a development, where somebody had asked questions about how they bill. We have been, the doors are wide open, so we allow it. And at the end of the day, even when we charge our administrative review fee for billing it out, that fee then covers all the meetings that we have after the fact to go through each one of the bills and say, okay, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, we don't agree with this, they don't agree with this. And it probably barely covers, if not, I know the project we've been working on recently, that is just. You
Yeah,
can hunt
look at
that
that
past the
number.
50.
Truly look at.
But that
number.
also happens is like, when the bills go out, I send them out every month unless the developer asks for something different. I've had one developer ask just for quarterly. But, unless they go under the 25,000, but, they'll also hold that up too of, that they haven't paid because they haven't reviewed it. But I'm giving you 30 days, like,
Yeah, but does it have any
Yeah.
value because the 30
and,
days has
and we
no
can't do
penalty,
anything
so
about
what
it,
the hell?
yeah, and we can't do anything about it,
We've had
Right.
developers go back 2 years.
yes.
Well, this is standard, right? A late fee for an invoice that, that's 30 days.
Well, I think the nice thing about this is it's a recognition that when that's hanging out there, you've actually paid
Yes,
GMB the bill. You basically extended
You
the
hit on
loan to the developer.
Mhm.
But you were not getting any interest rate for that loan
Mhm.
extension, and you're not a bank.
Correct.
Amen.
My only comment on the 8% would be,
Mhm.
rates change over time. As you know, I mean, we just had a dramatic change in the last few years here in the States.
Mhm.
Oftentimes when people do this, they use a reference rate and then an addition. So it used to be, they would say LIBOR plus 5%.
Super now.
When LIBOR goes, when the Fed raises rates, the whole thing goes up. When the rate, Fed
Mhm.
drops those short-term rates, it goes down. LIBOR has been shut down as a mechanism largely, and now in the US, there's something called the SOFR rate, SOFR, that is typically used. And so what you would put, I'm not saying we should go there, I'm just bringing this up as
No, that
a
makes sense.
possibility.
Yes.
But what you would have here is, this would be your plus number. So the thing would be SOFR plus
Yep.
5% or
So
4%
same
or
thing,
7%.
our
Right,
credit's the
right,
same
right,
thing.
right.
Yeah,
Because, yes.
if you fix it hard, most of the time it may work, but there may be times where you say, wow, this is really,
It's.
we're really at it, yeah.
How does the escrow account get established?
After the agreement's signed, the developer has to make a $50,000 escrow amount. I'm just using the most recent one.
Mhm.
So they would make a $50,000 escrow payment. That payment sits there, and then these bills come in, we draw it down.
But where'd the 50,000 come from? Or whatever
That is
the,
our
the
return,
amount
so.
is, what's the mechanism that sets up that initial amount upon which this discrepancy of late payments and so on?
That's how it's always been done. Which
Okay, yes.
Ah.
That
Bad words.
it was yesterday.
Yeah,
We're looking into, what is the right mechanism for establishing that escrow? What should we be saying of how it's established in addition to giving percentages or the so forth plus X%?
you can, and you can do it as, it's based off an engineered estimate of the costs associated with construction administration. Because that's, GMB is gonna provide the services for construction administration, which includes RPR, and then just your regular CA, which is like plan review, submittals, etc. So you can do it based off that. You can do it at 80% of that number, because it's an estimate at the end of the day.
But that estimate that GMB provides includes the payments that we've agreed will make the payments, but part of the payments go to the city.
No,
No,
two separate. You would have two separate, so like the city, not speaking for you guys, but I believe you guys get a separate proposal from GMB. Do you guys get a separate proposal? Yeah, each time you have a development review.
Yes.
Yeah. So
okay,
you would be split, so you would have just call it preliminary to final approval, which would be anything associated with planning commission meetings, park and rec meetings, all that. And then you would have, after the development agreement signed, then you have what they consider CA, which is your RPR services and your just construction admin services, which is submittal review, your RPR services, your generic kind of construction phase stuff.
so we
What's
are
the,
only
Construction
been,
administration.
we've only been a bank for our own charges that need to be reimbursed by the developer.
So-
Our own being the
Utility.
inspections, the reviews, the change orders.
Well, technically, if you're looking at it as an all encompassing, once we take that, I'm just gonna call it a baton, is handed off to us after the DA signs,
Right.
that we're the so-called bank, just as the city is previously, before this,
Right.
we're the bank for both us and the city. Because the city's receiving the same services through construction administration, which would be looking at curb and gutter, looking at the sidewalks, looking at the open space, your landscape plan, your roads. All that is encompassed into GMB's proposal.
And all of which is part of the developer's agreement of their responsibility.
Yeah, it would spell out, and it like, sometimes it references just construction. It'd talk about like the construction plans approved on this date, and it would have it's usually 15 different documents that's all signed by, like Ellen Ray would sign it, I would sign it, Janelle would sign it, Charlie would sign it. And in there, it would lay out all the improvements. It would lay out the landscape plan, the utility plan, the stormwater plan, the streets plan, the sidewalk plan, all that stuff. So it would reference all the improvements that then GMB would say, per these sets of plans, this is the service I'm gonna provide. And it's typically an estimate, but they bill it off an hourly rate.
So I'm confused. Which is easy to have happen, but, at first you said that we're paying out only the BPW related charges, but then it sounds like you were just talking about the escrow covers both city and
Yes,
BPW.
the
Okay,
escrow covers both city and BPW
Okay.
once they go through final approval.
once they-
Before,
Right.
there may be utility rate related things regarding preliminary approval, which then the city is responsible for that cost until it gets to the next phase,
Yeah.
which would be ours.
Okay, okay,
But we are, anything related to that development, if you look at White's Pond, you look at Henlopen and Bluff, anything related to that development that GMB would be charging for, in this case, we would be paying GMB for it and then going to the developer to ask for reimbursement for that.
so then there's no point in asking the city what's their policy for collecting or determining escrow amounts or anything.
Well, they
Oh,
have,
Austin.
you guys have a policy for the preliminary review, but
Yeah.
not for the other.
And
Before it gets to
are
the
we
developer.
only talking about GMB bills or are there other bills? Not,
So you
There's
have
legal.
attorney, you have a legal,
Yeah.
and then I think, I wanna say the developers agreement actually spells out like anything, any fees associated with review. It goes through like review, legal. It's a whole laundry list, so it doesn't specifically say GMB, it just says professional service associated with.
okay, so,
exact stuff.
and as a reality, you just mentioned, it's more than just GMB. GMB may be the bulk.
Yeah.
But there may be a hit of legal fees for some reason occasionally.
Potentially,
Can you give us a sample of a development agreement? Maybe one that's pretty comprehensive, that have most of the fees, when you have a fee schedule?
I can provide you with the Old Town of White's Pond Development Agreement and the proposal from GMB for the construction phase.
That gives a good comprehensive view of all the fees.
Do you want like
I wanna get a sense of. what you
the
just talked about.
estimate, or do you want the actual cost?
Let's go to the ballgame.
I wanna see what's in the development agreement.
The development
But
agreement
that's-
it's gonna be very high level, it's just gonna say,
Whatever you think is appropriate along with the development agreement. Give us a sense as to the fees that are being assessed and. Consistent with what we're reading here in the policy.
But it's GMB's proposal, that's probably gonna help you set the size of the escrow.
because we're relying upon.
Yeah.
Their-
Yeah,
And then the question would be, if GMB came back, I'm just gonna throw out bullshit numbers here, but if GMB came back and said it's gonna be $1,000.
I'd sign it
know.
today.
Yeah, right, it's cheap as you'd ever get.
You have a choice of how much of that you want to escrow. You go back to the builder and say, we're gonna escrow 800 of that, 80%, or. You know what, we're gonna make sure there's a buffer in here, so we're not holding the bag, so to speak, so we're gonna escrow 110% of it.
And that's exactly where I think Richard's going with this, is that saying, okay, how do we develop that? Do we want to do 80% of whatever the estimates are? Do we want to do 110%?
Yeah, and so right now, I'm taking it that GMB gives you an estimate and you only escrow a portion of that. And then you're in a situation where you have to keep going back to the builder to get, or developer to get more.
So we've had two, I want to go back, we've had two developments, one very small and one a little bit larger come through since the transition from Darren to us. And I say us as like the administration. We've been pushing for this for kind of some time, and we've discussed it internally, and we're just kind of getting to that point. But we've said it from the beginning, because you'll get an estimate, and that estimate may be $220,000, but you're only escrowing 50. Well, if you look at 50 and 25, you can get a bill that's $20,000. So you're gonna be replenishing it every month and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then to go, if one of these developments took 2 years to build out, the developer may really balk on coming up with $250,000 right up front before he's got any kind of.
We have an example of that right now that's outside the city, where a developer's doing 13 phases and they're only at phase 5.
Yeah.
And that project's been going on since 21. So it'd be a 4 to 5 year project.
I mean, in the simple world, I would have said escrow 110% and be done with it. I realize it's not that simple. At least that gives you some buffer, and you're leaving them on the hook to.
Yeah.
They're absorbing some of the risk. I like the idea of the interest rate and all, but if the developer goes under somewhere along the line there, you're left holding the bag.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, we might say that's probably unlikely, but we did have an incident back in 2008, 2009, where developers went under all over the lower
That's
state.
true.
And the Lewis Board of Public Works should be holding, you know,
Clarify for me, or when, in your example, if you get $220,000 bill there from GNB estimate. What's the flow? Because we're not asking the developer to put up 220,000, right? Because it's 20,000 estimate over a period of time, 2 years, maybe, right?
Potentially, I'll use,
Or a year, whatever.
use $200,000 is, the most recent one we did was just under 100 units. It was $200,000 estimate. And the typical development agreement says post $50,000
Okay.
initially.
But I guess I'm trying to get a sense of what the cash flow looks like. The estimate is 200,000, whatever it could be. When are you paying, right? When are you writing a check to GNB?
Every month.
Every month? And based on that estimate of 220, or based on the actual charges?
Actual.
Okay. So that could vary all throughout the year.
You bring up another, because then you go into the difference between billing an estimate that's off of T&M versus billing an estimate that's hard numbers. Like if you know it's gonna be $200,000, they may do a draw schedule where it's 15, 15, 15, 15, 15 all the way to your end. Or they may do 20, 50, and then end it with 30.
or there's a possibility that they give you an estimate of 200, but it really comes to 250.
Mhm.
Sure.
And then you
Yeah.
have to go back to the developer and you're the interface there.
Correct.
So we get the bill from GNB, we pay, I'm sure they give us 30 days net or 18% interest charge for late keeling. So when do we turn around and bill the developer for that?
It's after it goes through the approval process,
That's
so.
what-
We receive the bills generally in the middle of the month, and then it goes through our approval process to approve the invoices. To set up payment for them, and then I bill them at the end of the month, so about
Okay.
2 weeks in between of when
But
we
you
receive
gotta have
it.
an escrow in there ready to pay it from.
Yep.
Or you would have to go out and give them 30 days to come up with a
Yeah.
deficit. Plus.
And meantime, more bills are coming in with a project that's ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, we thought about getting creative and just saying that you would say we're using GMB as your RPR services or construction admin, and you must contract with them. So that you would pay them directly, but then that gets in an issue because if they don't pay GMB for the RPR services, then they don't have the hook. Like if the city's doing it, then we have the hook of saying, well, we'll stop building.
Got a lot of power, don't you?
A lot of stuff going on.
Well, is it more than just simply charging a late fee? It sounds like it's this whole process.
Yes.
That these
Yes, there.
thought about and re-engineered here.
So we,
Or like any bank, when you extend a loan, you are now, they're your debtor, you're a creditor of them. So now you've taken on a risk that whatever, that
Late
development, something happens along the way.
Yeah, but I'm hearing there's two different things there, and this may be a well-oiled machine from the standpoint of the bills coming from GMB and getting them paid, and the developers paying whatever the deficit is, or at least what should be, the replenishment plus something. I'm sure there's some calculations that are going on to figure all this out. But that's a whole different process outside of our scope at the moment, but I'm just saying, based on what I'm hearing, if there isn't I'm sure there's a real well-designed process to make this work, right?
Well, the best thing-
We have brainstormed many a times. We've gone through this to try and figure out what's best, because it's not one shirt fits every single
Understand.
situation. And that's because you'll have like, and I'll use Fisher's Cove, it's 18 units. That project's not gonna have the same construction phase services as a project like Mitchell's Corner, that's gonna be 294 amps. Plus, then Mitchell's Corner is water only, so really then you're only looking at one utility that needs to go through the process versus having 4 utilities. So it really, if you had to bifurcate it, you have in city and out of city, because once you get to out of city, your flexibility ends, because you can't use the backstop of saying, okay, the city stops building permits because they haven't paid on something. Then you're dealing with county. So then you're in a whole nother ballgame, because the county's not a part of the agreement that you have, only you and the developer are. Versus in an in-city situation, it's us, the city, and the developer.
So for out of city, could we have them contract directly with GMB?
That was one of the ideas that we had. That's the attorney.
Somebody else can come across.
So there's a couple things that, what percentage is required for the escrow deposit? What is the threshold of what they meet when that escrow account drops below a certain percentage or a dollar amount, whatever? When we ask for replenishment, and are we asking for full replenishment back to where it was set or partial? The interest rate and any other actions that we can take if it's not paid.
Well, I think we just raised another one too, which
And-
is there any reason why Board of Public Works ought to be an interface between a developer and GMB?
Yeah, that just
Straight to
came up.
GMB.
Do we get anything out of that?
We have a 15% admin fee, but honestly, by the time we go through the bills and if, after we have meetings with the developers and everything, it's not anything.
Would GMB push back on that? If you said you need to, you need to work with the developer directly?
I don't know.
I thought there was some leverage that BPW has that maybe GMP does not have.
Well, it's more the city's leverage, right? The city is the one that gives the building permits.
For the in-city,
Right,
For
yeah,
the in-city,
yeah.
yes.
I thought there was something in the policy that, not the additions, but the actual policy that provided phone restrictions.
We have right of entry, would we have right of entry if we
No,
weren't?
I'm referring to the actual policy.
Ah.
There's several more pages to like 6
Yeah.
points. So I thought when I was reading that, there's other.
well,
provisions that-
everything that's underlined is new.
Right, I'm looking at the existing policy.
well, that's the whole thing.
The existing policy doesn't talk about
Oh, no.
remedies.
Penalties or
Or
That, for,
I mean, that's where I read it.
Yeah.
Vote obligation.
if you're looking at a copy, if you're looking at the developer's agreement in the policies, there is no 6.1 18 or 6.8.
I thought I read in the existing policy, there was some actions that could be taken, but maybe others.
yeah, it's funny, Kim, if GMB can work directly with the developer, almost all this discussion we just had goes away.
Mhm.
Yeah,
No bank, no loan, no worrying about escrow arrangements, no penalties, no SOFR rates, it all goes.
Is there a conflict of interest issue? If the developer is contracting with the inspector?
It's a good question.
But it's worth
Yeah.
exploring.
Well, considering how much work is involved.
Yeah.
Well, it seems that for where we have the backstop to the city, for in-city, we participate in establishing the escrow via what we're trying to change and structure. And your simple idea of the estimate plus a percentage would seem to be a defensible starting point that the board has final say reasonably. And if there is an issue of, wait a minute, it's a, $2 million escrow, estimate by GMB, then surely BPW could, from their experience and knowledge of, it's either one utility or it's four, make the escrow account timed to be something of a percentage plus still a markup.
So,
And after 20% is installed, you can change it to a different formula. And after 50%, the escrow is an appropriate amount for the next tranche, if you will.
what about establishing it on the anniversary date of the developers agreement? So you have an idea from GMB what you're gonna spend that first year. And at the end of the year, you look at what you think's gonna be spent the following year.
Right.
And establish
You
it.
can
at
reset it, so it's
10%.
reasonable, fair and reasonable.
I like that idea, but I think what these guys did might be a little bit, they did it more event driven. When the escrow account falls to this point,
Right,
some developments maybe go quicker than others. Maybe some don't even take a year to kind of, but some others might go on for multiple years.
Yeah, that's the issue.
So maybe the event driven, if you can't, if there's not a reason to bypass Board of Public Works in this whole process.
Yeah, that would be, that's 110% of the 1 year estimate.
Yeah.
And then whatever, 3 months, 2 months, whatever before the year, then it's reevaluated and another bill gets sent out. Net 30 of 110% of that following year.
Yeah, I'm sitting here listening to this thing and it sounds like sounds getting more complicated. It's probably what we don't want to do. And I know this is even not on the agenda, as part of, nice to have this discussion, and I think it's a good one to have, but I think my recommendation is to get some more feedback from you all about that other stuff that we're talking about right now, about the process and how best to attack, these escrows. That's something entirely different than what the agenda is for, what fee should we charge. At least I'm thinking here what it is.
it's a rather broad statement.
Well, it sounds like we're getting, from what I'm hearing, it seems getting a little more complicated without all the facts.
So I feel like at this point, it's been a lot of brainstorming and Kim's got some good notes and there's some things to have maybe a rich
Please talk
conversation
about
for the next.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
guess that's the point. Let's get some more information. Let's come back. Let's make this a agenda items, have a further discussion on the process and how we can maybe streamline the process.
Are there-
Or even get rid of the process entirely.
What started new?
What projects are in this phase of establishing or about to establish escrow, if any?
There's a couple, there's Gibbs. Henlip and Bluff,
Big one.
I think there's 2 more, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Okay, but we could look at those as models and apply, different formulas, like the 1 year
The what
and,
ifs.
I like the idea though for out of city ones, getting out of it completely. Like on contract, but although you did raise a good point about conflict of interest. If they're paying the inspector.
Yeah.
Is in that situation, BPW is not incurring any fees? Or is they're not paying?
No, it's just that we can't,
it's like we hire the inspector
Yeah.
as a third party,
right,
Right.
because we could be doing the inspection, but we don't have the personnel.
right.
So we hire.
Right.
A reputable third party that knows the project.
And if it's out of city, then the county hires that inspector.
No, one of the things we talked about was maybe the developer going directly to GMB, just taking us out altogether. And then Richard raised a good point, which is it could be a conflict of
Maybe.
interest. You know, it's funny in the finance field, when a corporation wants to do a debt issuance, they actually go to Moody's and S&P and Fitch and actually pay to have their debt rated. That's actually been considered a little bit of a problem during that last financial crisis. I think my point is, I think your point's a good one.
Yeah, yeah.
We should probably at least be aware of that, and we're thinking through this.
Or whether whoever is, well, whether Sussex or whoever I guess it would be Sussex Council.
Yeah,
By the way, I mean, I bet there's competitors to GMB. If you sort of said to the developer, we're not going to be in the middle of this, they might be able to go to who knows who, Jimmy's brother to do the inspection, or,
yeah.
Yeah, it has to be someone that we agree with.
Yeah, I mean,
That
'cause
could
if
be
we're
in the-
doing, if we are doing the work for the out of city, we want to have a comfort level that there's no shenanigans,
Because it's
You know,
gonna become
reliability.
our asset
Yeah.
at the end of the
Water line
project.
or the sewer line, whatever. Yeah.
Can we just answer our own question?
Yeah.
we're working on it.
It could be in the agreement that it has to be vetted by us if they're gonna go to an outside company other than G&B too.
How much control you want to get rid of?
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
this point.
Yeah.
I think this is a great conversation as a starter.
Yes.
I think more has to happen, in my view. I mean,
Sure.
we're happy to help.
It does show sometimes how what seemingly relatively simple things are actually quite complicated in detail.
We passed simple long time ago.
Yeah.
And the board was hoping for something. to present them on Thursday.
Oh, my.
I don't think so.
Well, I mean, we can present.
Well, in the meantime, can we just impose now the late fee and come back to this?
Not without a policy, I guess.
Yeah,
I think let's discuss that policy there.
Mhm.
And I think 8% is pretty low.
it is.
Yeah.
The banks and financial institutions are usually exempt from usury laws in most states. I think commercial transactions, I'm not aware, but usury is more consumer than commercial. So I'm not sure where this 8% came from. I think Delaware does have a usury statute that talks about 5% over the Fed discount rate, which currently is 5.5%.
But-
So you could impose, but I don't think that usury limit applies for commercial transactions. So we just need the attorneys to weigh in on that.
Well, but we are a not-for-profit organization. And that may limit the amount that we can be, well, wait a minute, 8% even is, you're making too much money.
What the agreement says. Well,
And that may set,
yeah, I think
what-
more than 8% is too low, and I think that's lesser of agreement where it's read. Where it's written, it's 8% or the lesser of 8% or the maximum allowed by law.
Yeah,
It doesn't say what's the maximum allowed by law.
No,
I mean,
it's
it's-
specific to that. That's why Mike wrote it the way that he did,
I
to allow for us to be able to, if the law changes for whatever reason, it's basically saying whatever's allowed by law, you
Yeah.
can charge.
No,
Yeah.
it's not.
He says the lesser.
It's a lesser of,
Oh,
Yeah,
the
it should be the
lesser.
higher.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's a lesser of 8%. So if the law allows you to 18%, then you won't be charged 8%.
Yeah,
And I feel like this probably should be really set at a cost plus, not a fixed rate. We could easily find ourselves in a situation where that rate looks ridiculous,
mhm.
both too high and too low.
Well, I mean, today the usury laws in Delaware use the Fed discount rate. Use that, plus another arbitrary.
It ought to be
margin.
something on top of that,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people used to like to do the prime plus, but,
Right.
but
Well, I mean, there's already embedded in Delaware statute, a usury rate that uses the Fed discount rate. I mean, so you're continuing with that, it's already out there.
Yeah.
In the public domain, you just gotta figure out what the margin is.
That's right. The Fed funds rate, a lot of people switched over to SOFR now, that a couple of, about 2 years ago, so that's kind of
So.
But again,
It's the rate that the Fed pays on reserves that banks hold at the Federal Reserve.
Mm.
So if you're Citibank and you have $500 million in reserves at the Fed, they will pay that rate to you. They will pay that rate to Citibank for those reserves. They've changed the way they do monetary policy. It is why that rate has become really important. On top of that, there used to be something called LIBOR, which is the London Interbank Offer Rate. That was being manipulated, so that people have moved away from LIBOR now and they're moving to SOFR. You guys are probably using SOFR on some of your stuff.
At one time, I knew the acronym of SOFR when it first came out, but I can't.
Secured overnight financing rate.
Ah, okay, thank you.
The reason that I want to remember.
I had to put it in here. I don't know what it is.
She had to learn.
Come on.
there's sometimes you just don't admit those things, and people don't think what they want to think.
That was pretty fast though.
She's really smart, that's what.
Yeah.
I think we had brought up with GMB why they don't bill the developer directly, and it's because they said we're providing you the service, so we want to bill you for the services that we're providing. instead of-
They don't want to chase the developers, isn't it, Rick?
Yeah.
Have you write the check immediately?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I would do the same thing.
Richard raised a conflict of interest point too, which was a very good one. You know, the developer hiring their own inspectors to do their own,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
you lose kind of some of that control. But it would solve a lot of problems if you could push it off on them.
Or you had, the only other thing is if you had your own staff. Like Sussex County, like we know how Sussex County bills theirs out. Which is based off of, like, they do a total, I think they do a percent of the total project cost. And so they have a calculation that allows them to charge it as a fixed rate, but they're using one inspector for 7 different jobs, so. You can see how, one inspector may spend a little bit of time here and then move on to another job and they're charging a fixed rate, so it's not like, in this scenario. GMB provides an RPR that sits at that job for 8 to 10 hours a day doing that job. So if you're paying out at 110 hours, $110 an hour, if they're working a 40-hour week, you can do your math on how quickly that adds up.
Mhm.
What projects are about to be agreed to as a developer? Where are we in that pipeline?
Like any development agreements coming down the pipe.
Yes.
There would only be,
Do we need to get something in place now of, not LIBOR, but the SOFR plus X% to begin to, or at least a placeholder, we're working on language to have that kind of control. Are we in a?
Yes,
crunch
everybody
with
talk
any-
about
my
it.
personal opinion, and this is, it can potentially be a Mike question, but. You can handle one, like we have a form development agreement, but if you wanna add something to a development agreement, it comes back to the board. So, like, if you would make the suggestion that you want X added to the development agreement, then we can add X to the development agreement, and it would be handled on that case. Just like for Tower Hill, for example, that had totally separate guidelines because it was doing all-site utilities and there was a cost share document. So each development agreement is different. I think you can handle them as a case by case. It's a matter of what you want to do is add this to a form agreement so that when a developer comes, you're just going to say,
Right.
this is our form agreement.
Yes,
As far as projects coming down the line, you're going to have Mitchell's Corner, which is out. You're going to have Mitchell's Corner residential and Mitchell's Corner commercial, which is out across from the high school. You're going to have the beach house, but I don't know, that's site development, so I don't know if they're going to do anything for BPW improvements. Potentially the one Rick Quill's property
205.
at Alaska.
Yeah.
You have Henlopen and Bluff,
Mhm.
White's Pond Preserve,
Yeah, Gibbs.
Gibbs. Potentially.
I would think that you want to, if we're gonna do this, I would also want us to consider maybe amending the existing. I mean, is there a provision in the existing development agreements for amendments?
Ooh,
Can we go out and impose, amend the agreement to include this lake.
I'm not sure because it would have to go. Pending the one development agreement that potentially would be wrapped up this week, which is not, it does not involve the city. I think you would need to have buy-in from both because you have two signatures. You have the city of Lewis, you have the Board of Public Works, and you have the developer. And I don't even know if there's language in there.
Yeah, I
for
don't
any
know if
sort of
there's
like-
language that we can
Yeah,
change it.
well, we could, yeah, we'll give a copy.
Form agreement, and then give me one that's.
There's there,
complex.
we have a form agreement online. So it's in our compilation of policies. If I can remember, I believe the development agreement is actually in there as the compilation. And then we have an example that we can send you of White's Pond, which is.
But it doesn't have any of the penalties,
No, that's existing agreement. Yeah,
and that's what we were trying to.
Yeah.
That's what we're working on. Defining, figuring out what is it that we put in here that addresses that, yeah, it's a policy.
Mhm.
What's the current rate so far?
This morning
same
it
as
was
the federal.
5.39,
What is it?
it went up.
It's basically the
5.3.
Fed funds rate. It's, they're almost linked.
What was full? It was SOFR plus
Too.
2. So in that
Yeah.
scenario, you'd be 7%.
Again, I like, that's fine, but then the margin's gonna be huge, in my view. The Fed discount rate, which is again set in statute for in Delaware for usury, which is 5.5, I would recommend like 12, margin of 12 and Fed funds, get to 18%. What's our target? I mean, is it 8% seems pretty low?
So for our
It's-
customers, it's 18% per year.
18%?
Yeah,
Per year.
yeah.
It's 1.5%.
1.5 per month.
Well, we're talking about per annum anyway, right?
Yeah.
We never talked about a monthly,
Yeah.
monthly rate, right?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, because the thing is written as per annum. I want to make sure that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, right. It's not 18%.
So
Correct.
we should be
Yeah,
clear, 'cause
right.
that's an annualized rate, but
Yes.
if they only are overdrawn for 2 months, then you're only gonna get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why, 8% or this seems ridiculously low.
But most, reference rates, SOFRs and all that are annualized rates. If you're only taking the money overnight, you're barely paying a fraction of a
Yeah,
penny,
exactly.
but. The question is, question is, what's the reference rate? SOFR, I don't think anybody would argue that. And then the second, well, maybe the discount rate, which is a little bit of a different animal. But a lot of people in the public world are using SOFR. I was just in a real estate deal that's using SOFR in 2.5. So the second question is gonna be, what's the risk premium over top of that SOFR? Like I said, I was just in a real estate deal for 2.5 over SOFR. I don't know whether that's too low or too high for this. Right now, anyways, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at that, then. There's no incentive, right? I mean, is that gonna generate enough income for? the
Well,
tenant?
if it's a large bill, yes. But if it's
It's gonna be a
$300
fraction
bill.
of, it's gonna be, it might be like 20 basis points.
Would you do the penalty off the total with admin fee?
Yeah.
Total cost plus admin plus penalty.
yes,
Yeah.
Your point's a good one, Calvin. I don't know where something is painful enough that somebody gives it the due attention they should. And where you go too far, obviously you could do SOFR plus 50% and people's attention would be very quick, but I don't know where those, it's kind of I just have no way of gauging that.
I mean, at the end of the day, you gotta think like if the developer wants to have the utilities improved, they have to pay for all the outstanding debt that's owed to, for example, us. And so if they don't, then they have to continue to post a bond, which, annually, depends on how much the bond would be for 150% of a $2 million worth of improvements. Significant amount. And they would still be responsible for all the utilities.
And
Wait,
the city lake charges as well.
Yes.
The real estate deal I just talked about was bad because that was a collateralized loan. In a sense, you've taken money from these developers if they defaulted or walked away and you just paid GMB $50,000. I don't know that you have any collateral.
Yeah,
So
the performance bond.
There is a collateral.
You have a 150% performance bond to theoretically finish and that's the argument is that 150%, but it's on the construction. Now, the question is, could you loop the
I mean, how would-
inspection of the construction?
How would you get your 50,000 back in that situation?
It would be, I would have to go back and look at each one of the bonds that are posted to see if you could make the claim that the inspection is part of the improvements. Because you can go and call on the bond at 150%. Mind you, 150% saying if you have $2 million of improvements, you got to post a bond at 150% of that $2 million to be able to finish the improvements, which we would be able to call on the bond, and then we would go to, contractor X to finish the improvements. The question is, could you loop in?
Well, I'm thinking like a
Outstanding.
2008, 2009 scenario where the whole real estate market shuts down for a year or two, and you guys have just paid GMB $50,000. How do you, at least in a real estate deal, you could say, I'm taking over the building.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna sell it, and whatever you're gonna do with it. It feels to me like there really isn't
There's not an
collateralization
easy-
here in that sense.
There's not an easy way to do it.
Yeah, so effectively you're a creditor, like, if the developer was a poor credit, a bank would charge them SOFR plus a really high risk premium on top. If the developers are really good credit, maybe it would be something less.
The only thing I thought about doing is you could do a lien on the property and then do a forbearance agreement. The property that's being developed.
The whole idea, this is a penalty fee, right? I mean, the deal is that you want them to think about not paying.
Right, trying to incent behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And quite frankly, in my mind, whether you use the discount rate or so for, I mean, your margin is going to be 12 or 14%. I think you want to get to a bogey like around 18%. In my mind, I mean,
So they
18%.
pay attention,
Pardon?
so they pay attention.
Can you do the
Yeah, exactly,
maximum?
exactly.
It's right now.
interest rate
Yeah, I
permitted
mean,
by law?
that's nothing right now, so no
That's
one's paying attention.
Honestly, if it's a fixed rate, it'd be interesting if it's a fixed rate or if they've written it so that it does take into account interest rate variability. That's all coming from the state of Delaware.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know how they even wrote that.
The maximum, if we did that, charge the maximum annual interest rate permitted by law. Rather than an either or.
Yeah, but then you have to figure out what the law says, though. I mean, that says what's prevented by law. What does the law say? And I think, and if in one situation, which I think is only consumer, the maximum permitted by law is the discount rate plus five marked at 5%. That's the maximum permitted by law. So you got to take whatever that is and put it in, in the agreement so that you have to let people know what that rate is, so they can figure out what a rate is without going to the Delaware code to figure out what that is. The agreement has to say whatever your index is and whatever your margin is, so they can figure that out themselves.
I think we're all in agreement on that since.
In Delaware, it's 5%.
Oh,
5% is the margin over the Fed discount rate. But I think that's on a consumer context only.
Okay,
Right, not in the commercial transaction.
Yeah, we need a trace just to double check. I mean, banks are exempt for usury, financial institutions are exempt, they can charge 25% if they want to. And they do, by the way.
So maybe we change we'd have to get a charter change to make it BPW. And bank.
thank you.
but
You don't want that, otherwise you're gonna have the state of Delaware Bank Commercial's office and everybody FDIC and everyone else in there.
The Richard Nichols branch.
You have more headaches than you believe.
that's the only thing when I said you'd lien the property. Be no different if somebody didn't pay their utility bill.
If they didn't pay the utility bill, we would disconnect the utility
And lien the property.
and the property.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep paying.
Are you gonna go back to Mike just to double check on the maximum there?
Yes,
Mhm.
because I was curious, since we are a not-for-profit or not-for-profit. That may be an element of.
Yeah.
A cap in some sense for
It's the same thing with like, I think. We talked about this, Kim and I talked about this, I think there's something in Delaware state law, same with like a credit card processing fee. I don't think you can charge it as a percent, I think you have to charge it as a fixed number. When it comes to a utility bill, I think that's in Delaware state law, I may be just completely glazed over, but I thought that I remembered that.
This is not a utility bill, this is a commercial transaction.
Well,
It's not-
that's,
it's not a
He was
transaction.
just giving another example of
yeah,
specificity to utilities.
within Delaware state law.
Right, understand. Understand. But that's a, you know, I got that. You could have a commercial.
Bye. See you, Tom.
You could have a commercial customer, right? You do a commercial customer.
Yes,
Mhm.
it's my question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I would suggest you go to Mike and say what we want to do. And then let him say why we can, or if we agree that we can.
we want to charge the maximum.
Tell us what it is.
And it's not what he wrote.
Well, but he could probably write it in an elegant way, so it comes out that way. But it's not blunt.
Yeah, I mean, we want to charge an index on a margin, the index is either discount rate or the SWIFR, and the margin is gonna be 12. But get to our 18%. That's what we want to get to.
Okay.
And it's a commercial, remind, it's a commercial transaction, it's not, no consumers involved. Rules are different.
Any other comments, input, feedback? Complaints?
Well,
Okay.
there's still the question of how big the escrow account should be.
But that's something that could be in BPW's reasonable discretion and based on the duration of the project, the estimated
You could do estimated administrative costs along with any sort of consultant estimates, something like that.
right, and a timing issue to figure out, okay, what should the escrow account be in various time sequences that reflect a 100+%
Mhm.
charge and a 50% replenishment
Mhm.
once it falls below 50%.
Mhm.
So it's the 50/50. It's the implication is it's back up to the top in that duration.
Mhm.
And then there's another duration, another calculation that may be different, either up or down, but the same conceptual formula applies that's reasonable and still gives us a profit.
And keep this administratively simple and easy to calculate on a regular basis, right?
Kim likes complex.
I love it. Yeah.
What's described or keeping it simple?
As simple as possible is,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
but
Yeah, let's keep the calculations.
yeah, that I don't have to review it every month and do a
Otherwise,
percentage.
you reduce error.
Any other comments?
The question on Mike is commercial construction transaction, right? It's a commercial construction. As far away from consumer as you can.
Going once, going twice?
I did have one comment on the rate of entry under 6.1.8.4. Developer must allow representatives for the BPW access to all parts of the subject property undergoing development or involving construction of any BPW improvements included in the development agreement. Should that or be an and? I mean, do we want to have access to the inside of their property when, you know, their homes and stuff, when you've got no?
We don't have any,
Jurisdiction.
don't we don't connect inside,
No.
inside homes.
No.
We wouldn't be going in any premises.
So it would really be all parts of the subject property involving construction of any BPW improvements. Or might there be a time when we want access to other parts of the property that have nothing to do with BPW improvements?
You say we never go into properties, no,
Like inside, cause all of our responsibility ends at the
yeah.
property
understand.
line, the curb stop, or the clean out.
So you would never enter the subject property.
The only thing would be is if you had to enter a property to access. Like if you had a line that was configured in a way that it was behind a property or to the side of a property or in between two properties, but you would access that through an easement. You
Like-
potentially, if it's going through the development process, you may not have an easement yet. Because this would be done until you fully accept it. The development agreement would.
So, okay. The subject property really is the residential construction. That term is not defined here, but we assume that's what we're talking about. Subject property is actually residential.
That you can, I think it goes for all property, cause even if it's commercial property, we
Yeah.
would be.
Okay.
We don't go inside the home.
Or commercial, okay, because your responsibility ends at the curb.
Yeah. Yeah. We can do that.
Thanks, because I'm not gonna look at my notes there, on that section. Well, I know commercially reasonable is a term of art and it's really vague. It's all throughout this thing here. What do we mean by commercially reasonable time? You have three different paragraphs.
It's a great question for Mike.
Sounds like one of those lawyer squishy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
It's in many of our documents, not just
I
this.
understand. I've seen it many times in deals and stuff that we've been, but I think it's just too vague.
I'm not close enough to this. There may be some reasons why some vagueness might be helpful if you just can't simply document all the contingencies and whatnot, but that's, I guess, for the lawyer.
That's true. Gotta find a short way to do it.
Well, commercially reasonable time is provided year round. There is no definition of commercially reasonable time.
Well, the only thing I would say is in a developer's agreement, if I can remember, I don't know, I think there's a definition section.
Mhm. Thanks, I do.
That would be critical.
Think. Now, whether it's defined or not. I'm almost positive.
That would be the whole purpose of the definition section.
I know. I'm just trying to remember the last time we did a development agreement, it's like a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I think Mike needs to do a little work here. We love Mike, but
Yes,
He's a lawyer, what do you want?
but he's always said, any questions, please, let me know. And he's,
yeah, that's much.
he's usually
When's our next meeting?
responsive and,
And should we have a further discussion on this process procedure of escrows?
yes.
Well, both of these will come back.
Yeah.
You got
Yeah, because we want to be able to go to the board with something that we feel comfortable is reasonable, addresses the various things that we've collectively thought about. And be prepared to respond to questions that maybe we've raised or, you know, a new question. So,
Yeah. Have to set up another meeting when you guys revise.
yeah,
We hear back from Mike and you're gonna provide information to.
Underwriters.
On the debt coverage ratio.
Yeah.
I'll talk to our underwriters.
Okay.
We're gonna underwrite daily meetings.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great
I
afternoon.
guess if I was going to get like that.